After faking her death to escape the marriage, she returns, unaware her ex is still the Mafia boss. And what happens next will change everything she thought she knew about love, survival, and the man she left behind. The rain fell hard over Chicago that November evening, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon. Elena Marchetti stepped off the bus at Union Station, pulling her worn coat tighter against the cold. 5 years since she had last breathed this city air, last walked these streets, last existed as anyone other than a ghost. She looked different now. Her once long dark hair was cut short, dyed a soft auburn that caught the light in ways her natural color never had. Her face had thinned, sharpened by years of running, of working double shifts in small-town diners, of sleeping with one eye open. But her eyes remained the same, deep brown pools that held secrets too heavy for such a young woman to carry. Elena was 32 now. She had been 27 when she died. Or rather, when Elena Marchetti ceased to exist and Emma Collins was born from the ashes of a desperate escape. The taxi splashed through puddles as it carried her toward the north side, toward the address she had memorized from the lawyer's letter, her grandmother's brownstone, the only family she had left. And now Rosa Marchetti was gone too, leaving behind a modest inheritance and a mountain of questions Elena was not sure she wanted answered. She pressed her forehead against the cold window, watching the city transform around her. The old neighborhood had changed. Sleek high-rises now stood where crumbling tenements once decayed. Trendy coffee shops replaced the corner bodegas where she used to buy penny candy as a child. Progress, they called it. Elena called it erasure. The taxi stopped in front of a narrow brownstone wedged between two newer buildings like a stubborn relic refusing to surrender. Elena paid the driver with crumpled bills and stepped onto the sidewalk, her small suitcase wheels catching on the uneven concrete. The key the lawyer had sent fit perfectly into the old lock. The door groaned open, releasing the musty scent of closed rooms and faded memories. Elena stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the empty foyer. Everything was exactly as she remembered. The faded wallpaper with its delicate rose pattern, the wooden staircase with the third step that always creaked, the small table by the door where her grandmother used to keep a bowl of hard candies for visiting children. Elena closed the door behind her and leaned against it, finally allowing herself to breathe. She was home. After 5 years of running, of hiding, of being someone she was not, she was finally home. But home, she would soon discover, was no longer the safe harbor she remembered. Across the city, in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Dominic Vittori stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The rain streaked down the glass like tears, distorting the city lights below into abstract paintings of gold and white. He had aged in the 5 years since his wife's death. Silver now threaded through his dark hair at the temples, and lines had carved themselves around his eyes and mouth, lines that spoke of sleepless nights and buried grief. At 38, Dominic Vittori was still handsome in that dangerous way that made women look twice and men look away. But there was a coldness in him now that had not existed before, a fortress built around whatever remained of his heart. His phone buzzed on the desk behind him. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. Dominic turned, his jaw tightening as he saw the name on the screen. Marco, his right hand, his oldest friend, his most trusted advisor. Marco would not call 3 times unless it was important. He answered on the 4th ring. "What?" "Boss, we have a situation." Marco's voice was tense, controlled, but Dominic had known him long enough to hear the undercurrent of something else. Shock, perhaps, or disbelief. Talk. "It's about the Marchetti property, the brownstone on Ashland." Dominic's grip tightened on the phone. The Marchetti property, Rosa's house, the last connection to a life he had tried desperately to forget. What about it? A pause. Then Marco spoke the words that would shatter 5 years of carefully constructed numbness. "Someone moved in tonight, boss. A woman. Our guys ran her plates. Checked the taxi records. She came in from downstate, some small town called Millbrook." Another pause, heavier this time. "Boss, She looks like Eleanor. She looks exactly like Eleanor. The glass slipped from Dominic's hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. Whiskey spread across the wood like spilled secrets, but he did not notice. He did not feel the sharp sting as a shard sliced his ankle. He felt nothing except the sudden, violent resurrection of a grief he had buried so deep he thought it could never surface again. "That's impossible," he heard himself say. "Eleanor is gone. I buried her myself." "I know, boss, I know, but I'm looking at the surveillance photos right now, and I'm telling you, whoever this woman is, she could be Elena's twin. Same height, same build, same way of moving. The hair is different, shorter and lighter, but the face—" Marco's voice trailed off. "Dom, I think you need to see this yourself." Dominic ended the call without another word. He stood motionless, in the spreading pool of whiskey, his mind racing through possibilities he had long ago dismissed as fantasy. Elena was gone. He had accepted that. He had mourned her, raged against her loss, and eventually built walls high enough to contain the devastation. He had told himself that the car accident, the fire, the unrecognizable remains, all of it was simply fate's cruel joke. His young wife, taken from him before they could fix what had broken between them. But what if? The thought was dangerous. Dominic knew that. Hope was the most treacherous emotion of all, capable of destroying a man more completely than any bullet or blade. And yet, he reached for his phone and dialed a number he had not called in years. "Anthony, I need everything you can find on a woman named Emma Collins from Millbrook, Illinois. I need it tonight." Back at the brownstone, Eleanor had climbed the stairs to her grandmother's bedroom, each step carrying the weight of memories she had tried to forget. The room smelled of lavender and old books, the same scent that had comforted her as a child, when nightmares drove her to her grandmother's arms. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the worn quilt that Rosa had made herself 40 years ago. Every stitch was a story, Rosa used to say. Every thread connected to someone she loved. Elena had been one of those threads. The granddaughter raised more by Rosa than by her own absent parents, who had chased dreams and vices across the country until they simply never came back. Rosa had been everything: mother, father, teacher, protector, and Elena had repaid that love by disappearing without a word, by letting the old woman believe her only grandchild had perished in a fiery wreck on a rain-slicked highway. Tears burned behind Elena's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough in the years of her exile, cried for the life she had lost, the love she had fled, the person she had been before fear transformed her into a coward. Because that was what she was, wasn't it? A coward. A woman who had chosen to run rather than fight, to hide rather than face the truth of what her marriage had become. She opened the small suitcase and began unpacking her meager possessions. A few changes of clothes, threadbare but clean. A worn paperback book she had read so many times the spine had given up entirely. A single photograph, creased from handling, showing a young woman in a wedding dress standing beside a man, whose smile did not quite reach his eyes. Elena held the photograph for a long moment, studying the face of the man she had married, Dominic Vittori. Even now, after everything, his name moved through her like a current, electric and unsettling. She had loved him once, loved him with the blind intensity of a 25-year-old who believed that love could conquer anything, even the darkness that lived in her husband's world. She had married him knowing what he was, the heir to the Vittori family, one of the most powerful organizations in Chicago. She had told herself it did not matter, that the man she loved was separate from the empire he commanded. She had been so naive. The first year had been good, better than good. Dominic had been attentive, passionate, protective in ways that made her feel cherished rather than controlled. He had kept his work separate from their home, shielding her from the violence and power plays that defined his daily existence. But slowly, inevitably, the wall between his two lives began to crack. Late-night phone calls that made him dress in silence and disappear until dawn. Strangers appearing at their door with hard eyes and harder questions. The way his own eyes would sometimes go flat and cold when he thought she was not looking, as though the man she loved had stepped away and something else had taken his place. Elena had started asking questions. Dominic had started giving answers she wished she had never heard. And then came the night. That changed everything. She closed her eyes against the memory, but it came anyway, vivid and merciless. The argument. His voice raised for the first time in their marriage, not in violence, but in something worse, in fear. He had been trying to tell her something, trying to warn her about a threat she did not understand. And she, terrified and overwhelmed, had done the only thing her panicked mind could conceive. She had run. 3 weeks later, Elena Marchetti died in a car accident on Interstate 55. The vehicle had veered off the road during a storm, rolled down an embankment and caught fire. The body inside was burned beyond recognition, identifiable only by dental records and the wedding ring that had somehow survived the flames. What no one knew, what no one could know, was that the body in that car had been someone else entirely. A Jane Doe from the county morgue, unclaimed and unmourned, given a final purpose by a desperate woman with connections she had never wanted to use. Elena had not planned the deception alone. She had help from someone she had trusted, someone who owed her a debt that could never truly be repaid. Together, they had orchestrated her death with meticulous precision, erasing Elena Marchetti from existence and creating Emma Collins in her place. For 5 years it had worked. Emma Collins had lived a quiet life in a quiet town, waiting tables at a diner called Rosie's, renting a room above a hardware store, speaking to no one about her. Sayhast. She had convinced herself that she was safe, that Dominic would never find her, that the life she had fled was gone forever. But the letter from the lawyer had changed everything. Rosa's death, unexpected and devastating, had pulled her back to the city she had sworn never to see again. The inheritance was modest, the brownstone, some furniture, a small savings account. But that was not why Elena had come. She had come because guilt had finally grown stronger than fear. She had come to say goodbye to the only person who had ever truly loved her without conditions. And she had come, though she would not admit it even to herself, because some part of her had never stopped wondering about the man she had left behind. Outside the brownstone, a black SUV idled in the shadows. Inside, 2 men watched the single-lit window on the 2nd floor with practiced patience. "She matches the photos," one of them said into his phone. "It's definitely her, or someone who looks exactly like her." On the other end, Marco listened with growing certainty. "Keep eyes on her. Don't approach, don't engage. The boss wants to handle this himself." The man in the SUV acknowledged the order and settled in for a long night. Above them, unaware that her past was already closing in, Eleanor lay on her grandmother's bed and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally pulled her into dreamless sleep. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. If you love stories that grab your heart, and never let go stories that make you feel every emotion as deeply as if you were living them yourself, then you belong here with us. Hit that subscribe button now so you never miss a moment of what happens next. Morning arrived grey and reluctant, the kind of Chicago autumn day that seemed designed for melancholy. Eleanor woke to the sound of rain still tapping against the windows and the distant rumble of the elevated train several blocks away. She lay still for a moment, orienting herself to this unfamiliar, familiar place. Her grandmother's room, her grandmother's bed, her grandmother's life, now ended, leaving only objects and echoes behind. Elena rose and dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, then descended the creaking stairs to the kitchen. The refrigerator held only a carton of expired milk and a withered apple, reminders that Rosa had been too ill in her final weeks to shop for herself. Elena added grocery shopping to the mental list she was compiling right after meeting with the estate lawyer, and before figuring out how long she could stay without being discovered. Because someone would discover her eventually, she had accepted that risk when she boarded the bus in Millbrook. The question was not if, but when, and whether she could accomplish what she needed to do before that moment arrived. She found her grandmother's old coffee maker in the cabinet where it had always lived, alongside mismatched mugs and a sugar bowl shaped like a fat ceramic cat. The grounds, she discovered in the freezer, were stale but serviceable. Soon the kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of brewing coffee, and Elena allowed herself a small smile at the simple pleasure. She was pouring her first cup when the knock came at the front door. Elena froze, the coffee pot suspended in mid-air. No one knew she was here. The lawyer had agreed to keep her presence confidential until the estate was settled. She had told no one in Millbrook where she was going, had paid for her bus. Ticket in cash, had been so careful. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Elena set down the pot with trembling hands and moved silently toward the front of the house. The old brownstone did not have a peephole in its original wooden door, a security oversight that Rosa had never bothered to correct. Elena pressed herself against the wall beside the door and called out in a voice steadier than she felt. "Who is it?" "Delivery for E. Collins," came the reply. A man's voice, young and bored, the universal tone of package couriers everywhere. Elena's heart rate slowed slightly. A delivery. That was all. Probably something Rosa had ordered before her illness took hold. She unlocked the door and opened it a few inches, just enough to see the uniformed young man holding a rectangular package. "Sign here, please." He thrust a digital tablet toward her. Elena signed with the false name that had become her own, accepted the package, and closed the door quickly behind her. She stood, in the foyer, examining the box with growing unease. It was addressed to Emma Collins, not Rosa Marchetti, and the return address was a Chicago location she did not recognize. No one should know she was here under that name. No one. She carried the package to the kitchen table and stared at it for a long moment before curiosity overcame caution. Using a knife from Rosa's drawer, she sliced through the packing tape and opened the cardboard flaps. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single white orchid in a small crystal vase, and beneath it, a card in an envelope the color of cream. Elena's hands shook as she opened the envelope. The card inside bore only 2 words, written in handwriting she would recognize anywhere. "Welcome home." The card fell from her nerveless fingers, floating to the floor like a dying leaf. Dominic. Dominic knew she was here. Dominic knew she was alive. 5 years of running, of hiding, of being so careful, all of it undone in less than 24 hours. Eleanor's first instinct was to flee, to grab her suitcase, slip out the back door, and disappear again into the anonymous vastness of America. She had done it before. She could do it again. Find another small town, another assumed name, another life built on the foundation of lies. But even as the thought formed, she knew she would not act on it. Something had changed in the 5 years of her exile. Some fundamental exhaustion that made the idea of running again feel worse than facing whatever came next. She was tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of lying. Tired of being afraid. If Dominic wanted to find her, he would find her. He had the resources, the connections, the relentless determination that had made him king of an empire built in shadows. And perhaps some small treacherous part of her whispered, perhaps she wanted to be found. Eleanor picked up the card and placed it beside the orchid on the table. Then she poured herself another cup of coffee and sat down to wait for whatever came. Next, she did not have to wait long. The second knock came just after noon. This time Elena did not bother with caution. She walked to the door and opened it wide, ready to face the inevitable. But it was not Dominic standing on her grandmother's doorstep. It was a woman Elena had never seen before. Tall, elegant, with silver-streaked dark hair and cheekbones that could cut glass. She wore a tailored coat the color of storm clouds and regarded Elena with eyes that held both assessment and something that might have been sympathy. "You must be Elena," the woman said. Her voice was smooth and cultured, carrying hints of an accent Elena could not quite place. "Or should I call you Emma? I understand you have been using that name for some time now." Elena gripped the doorframe to steady herself. "Who are you?" "My name is Valentina Vittori. I am Dominic's mother." The woman paused, letting that information settle. "May I come in? We have much to discuss, and I would prefer not to. Have this conversation where curious eyes might observe." Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Dominic's mother, the matriarch of the Vittori family, the woman who had ruled the household even as her husband built an empire. Eleanor had met her only once before the wedding, a brief and formal encounter that had left her with the impression of controlled power wrapped in expensive silk. "How did you find me?" Eleanor asked, not moving from the doorway. Valentina smiled, an expression that did not quite reach her eyes. "My dear, you married into the Vittori family. Even in death you remained connected to us. When Rosa passed, we monitored the situation. We knew someone would come to handle her affairs." She tilted her head slightly. "We simply did not expect that someone to be a ghost." "And the orchid? The card?" "That was my son's doing. Rather dramatic, I thought, but Dominic has always had a flair for the theatrical gesture." Valentina glanced past Elena into the dim interior of the brownstone. "I would truly prefer to continue this conversation inside. The rain is beginning again, and this coat was quite expensive." Against her better judgment, Elena stepped aside. The two women sat in Rosa's small living room, separated by a coffee table covered in lace doilies and ancient magazines. Eleanor had not offered refreshment, and Valentina had not asked for any. They studied each other like chess players evaluating the board before the first move. "You faked your death," Valentina said finally. It was not a question. "Yes. You let us believe you had perished in that accident. You let my son bury an empty coffin, mourn a wife who was very much alive, carry the weight of guilt that nearly destroyed him." Elena's throat tightened. "I did what I had to do to survive." "Did you?" Valentina's voice was flat. "And what exactly were you surviving, Elena? My son loved you. He never raised a hand to you, never treated you with anything but devotion. Yet you chose to make him a widower rather than simply asking for a divorce." The accusation stung, not because it was unfair, but because it contained a grain of truth that Elena had never wanted to examine too closely. She had been afraid, yes. But afraid of what exactly? Dominic had never hurt her physically. He had never threatened her, never controlled her movements, never been anything but the man she had fallen in love with. Until that last night. Until the argument that had revealed the full truth of what his world contained and what her continued presence in it would mean. "You don't know what he told me," Elena said quietly. "You don't know what I learned about the family business, about the enemies circling, about what they would have done to me to hurt him." Valentina was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its sharp edge. "I know more than you think, child. I have lived in this world for over 40 years. I know what it costs to love. A man whose power makes him a target. I know the fear that lives in your chest like a second heartbeat, the constant calculation of risks and threats and worst-case scenarios." She leaned forward slightly. "But I also know that running solves nothing. The world does not become safer simply because you close your eyes to it." "I was 27 years old," Elena said. "I was pregnant." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Valentina's expression shifted, something cracking in the careful mask she wore. "Pregnant," she repeated slowly. 3 months along. I found out the same week Dominic told me about the threat from the Rossetti family, about what they had done to his cousin's wife to send a message. Eleanor's voice trembled despite her efforts to control it. "I couldn't risk it. I couldn't risk my child becoming leverage, becoming a target, becoming another casualty in a conflict that had nothing to do with innocent life." "And the child? What happened?" I lost the pregnancy." The words came out hollow, scraped clean of emotion by years of grief already processed and buried. 2 months after I left. Stress, the doctor said. My body couldn't maintain the pregnancy under those conditions. Eleanor met Valentina's eyes directly for the first time. "So you see, I didn't just run away from Dominic. I ran away to protect someone who never got the chance to exist. And I lost them anyway." The silence that followed was different from before. Less adversarial, more weighted with shared understanding of losses that could never be undone. Valentina rose and walked to the window, looking out at the grey afternoon. When she spoke, her voice had softened considerably. Dominic doesn't know. About the pregnancy, about any of it. He believes you simply couldn't handle his world, that you chose death over life with him. The guilt has eaten at him for 5 years. He believes he is the reason you died. I know. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. I've had 5 years to think about what I did to him. 5 years of knowing that my escape came at the cost of his peace. But I was terrified, Valentina. Terrified and pregnant and so young. I did the only thing I could think of to protect myself and my child, and I failed anyway. Valentina turned from the window. What will you do now? You must know that Dominic will come for you. He has already mobilized his entire network to verify your identity. By tomorrow, he will have confirmation that you are who he suspects you to be. And then he'll want answers. Eleanor stood, wrapping her arms around herself, as if fighting off a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. I don't have good answers, Valentina. I don't have explanations that will satisfy him or apologies that will undo the damage. All I have is the truth of why I ran and the reality that I can't run anymore. Why did you come back? Truly? Elena considered the question carefully before answering. My grandmother. I needed to say goodbye properly, to handle her affairs, to close this chapter of my life. I thought I could slip in and out without anyone noticing. Obviously, I underestimated your family's surveillance capabilities. You underestimated my son's inability to let you go. Valentina picked up her purse and moved toward the door. He has watched over Rosa's property for 5 years, Elena. He has maintained the brownstone, paid the property taxes, ensured that your grandmother wanted for nothing in her final years, all because this place was the last connection he had to you. Elena's eyes widened. Dominic did that? My son is many things, some of them terrible, but he loved you completely, and he has spent 5 years punishing himself for your death. Learning that you are alive will either heal him or destroy him entirely. I am not yet certain which. At the door, Valentina paused and looked back at Elena with an expression that was almost kind. He will come. Tonight. I cannot stop him, and I suspect you do not truly want me to. Whatever happens between you now, I ask only that you remember that pain has made him harder than he was. The man you knew is still there, but he is buried under years of grief and guilt and anger. Be patient with him if you can. Be honest, even if honesty is painful. And if you choose to run again. Valentina shook her head slowly. Don't. It will not end well for either of you. And then she was gone, leaving Elena alone, with the echoes of revelations and the growing certainty that her past had finally caught up with her in ways she had never anticipated. The hours between Valentina's departure and nightfall passed in a haze of anxiety and preparation. Elena cleaned the brownstone's dusty rooms with the nervous energy of someone who needed to keep her hands busy lest her mind spiral into panic. She found old photographs in Rosa's closet, images of herself as a child, as a teenager, as a bride. She lingered over that last one, studying the young woman in white who had believed so completely in the future she was stepping toward. That woman felt like a stranger now. Someone Eleanor had been in a different lifetime, before fear and flight had stripped away her innocence and replaced it with a survivor's hard-won wisdom. As evening approached, she changed into the nicest clothes she had brought, a simple black dress that had served as her uniform for the occasional interview or important meeting during her years as Emma Collins. She brushed her shortened hair, applied minimal makeup and stared at her reflection in Rosa's bedroom mirror. She looked older than 32. The years of looking over her shoulder, of starting at sudden sounds, of sleeping with packed bags beside her bed had carved themselves into her face. But there was something else there now, too, something that had not existed when she fled Chicago 5 years ago. Resolve. The kind that came from surviving the worst of your fears and discovering that you were still standing. The knock came at precisely 8 o'clock. Elena had been watching the street from the darkened front parlor, had seen the black car slide to the curb, had observed the tall figure emerge and stand motionless on the sidewalk for a long moment before approaching the door. She did not make him knock twice. The door swung open, and there he was. Dominic Vittori, the man she had married, the man she had fled, the man whose ghost had haunted her every dream for 5 years. He had changed. That was the first thing she noticed. The silver at his temples was new, as were the deep lines around his eyes and the tightness in his jaw. He had always been handsome in a dangerous way, all sharp angles and controlled power. But there was a weariness in him now, a weight that seemed to press down on his shoulders even as he stood straight and still. His eyes, though, his eyes were exactly as she remembered. Dark grey, the colour of storm clouds, over the lake, capable of warmth or ice depending on his mood. Right now they held neither. They held nothing at all, a deliberate blankness that frightened her more than anger would have. Eleanor. He said her name like a man testing a word in a foreign language, uncertain of its pronunciation. Or should I say Emma? Eleanor is fine. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. That's who I am. Emma was just a mask. A mask. Something flickered in those grey eyes, too fast to identify. For 5 years you wore a mask while I buried what I thought was your body, while I visited an empty grave and spoke to a woman who was very much alive, living under an assumed name in a town 300 miles away. Dominic! No. The word was sharp enough to cut. You don't get to explain yet. First you let me look at you. First you let me confirm with my own eyes what I've been told is impossible. He stepped into the foyer without waiting for invitation, closing the door behind him with a soft click that seemed louder than any slam. Elena retreated instinctively, and his jaw tightened at the movement. Still afraid of me, he observed. After everything, you're still afraid. I'm not afraid of you. The words surprised her with their truth. I'm afraid of this conversation. I'm afraid of what comes after it, but you personally. No, I was never afraid of you, Dominic. I was afraid of your world. My world. He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. My world that I built, around you like a fortress. My world that I would have burned to the ground if it meant keeping you safe. That world? The same world that made me a target. The same world that would have used our child as leverage against you. The words landed like physical blows. Dominic's mask cracked, revealing something raw and bleeding beneath. Our child, he repeated slowly. What child, Elena? What are you talking about? And so she told him. Standing in her grandmother's foyer, Elena told her husband everything she had kept hidden for 5 years. The pregnancy she discovered weeks before she fled, the terror that consumed her when she learned about the Rossetti family's threats, the desperate plan she hatched with the help of someone who owed her their life, the staged accident, the false identity, the years of hiding, and finally, with tears streaming down her face, she told him about the miscarriage that had taken their child before they ever had a chance to exist. Dominic listened without interrupting. His face had gone pale, his hands clenched at his sides. When Elena finally fell silent, he turned away from her, his shoulders rigid, his breath coming in controlled bursts that she recognized as his method of containing overwhelming emotion. The silence stretched between them, heavy with grief and guilt and 5 years of questions that could never be fully answered. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was hoarse. About the pregnancy, about your fears. Why didn't you come to me instead of running? Because you would have tried to fix it. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You would have gone to war against the Rossettis, escalated the conflict, made yourself an even bigger target, and I couldn't. Her voice broke. I couldn't be the reason you got yourself killed. I couldn't watch you destroy yourself trying to protect me. So I took myself out of the equation. I became a ghost, someone who couldn't be used against you, couldn't be threatened, couldn't be the weak point in your armor. You weren't a weak point. Dominic turned to face her, and she saw that his eyes were bright with unshed tears. You were the only point, the only thing that mattered. Everything I built, everything I did. It was all for you, Elena. And when you died, he stopped, swallowing hard. When I thought you died, all of it became meaningless. An empire without an empress, is just a prison with golden bars. Elena wanted to reach for him, to bridge the impossible, distance between them with touch. But she knew better. Too much had happened, too much pain had accumulated on both sides. Reconciliation, if it was even possible, would not come through a simple embrace. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know those words are inadequate for what I've done, but I am truly deeply sorry for the pain I caused you. That was never my intention." "What was your intention?" He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his familiar scent. Cedar and something. Darker, something she had never been able to identify. To disappear forever? To live as Emma Collins until you grew old and died? And I never knew the truth? I don't know. I don't think I ever let myself think that far ahead. I was just trying to survive each day, each week, each year. The future was too frightening to contemplate. And now? What happens now, Elena? That was the question, wasn't it? The question that would determine whether this reunion was an ending or a beginning. Before Eleanor could answer, a sound from outside interrupted them. The screech of tires, the slam of car doors, voices raised in urgent command. Dominic's entire demeanor shifted in an instant, the grieving husband disappearing behind the calculating eyes of the man who commanded an empire. "Stay here," he ordered, moving toward the window. "Do not move, do not make a sound." Elena obeyed, her heart pounding as old fears resurrected themselves with terrifying speed. Through the window, she could see figures moving in the darkness, too many figures surrounding the brownstone with military precision. Dominic's phone buzzed. He answered it, listened for a moment, and his expression hardened into something terrible. "The Rossettis," he said flatly. "Somehow they've learned you're alive. And they've decided that unfinished business is still worth finishing." The world that Elena had fled 5 years ago had found her, and this time there was nowhere left to run. If this story is making you feel something deep in your heart right now, if you're holding your breath wondering what happens next, then pause for just a moment and leave a comment below saying, "Even the strongest walls can't protect a broken heart." I want to know who's feeling this journey as deeply as I am. The brownstone had become a fortress and a trap, its old walls the only barrier between Elena and the armed men gathering in the darkness outside. Dominic moved with the efficient grace of someone who had faced such situations before, checking windows, assessing exits, making rapid calls on his phone in a voice too low for her to hear clearly. Eleanor stood frozen in the foyer, her mind struggling to process the sudden shift from emotional confrontation to physical danger. This was exactly what she had run from 5 years ago, this collision of her husband's world with her own existence, this moment when love became indistinguishable from war. "How many?" she managed to ask. 12, maybe 15. They've got the front and back covered, probably the roof as well." Dominic ended his call and met her eyes. "My people are 20 minutes out. We need to hold until then." 20 minutes. It sounded like an eternity. "I know this building," Dominic continued, his tone practical despite the impossibility of the situation. "I've studied every inch of it. Your grandmother had a safe room installed in the basement. My recommendation, my expense. If we can get down there before they breach—" A window shattered somewhere at the back of the house, punctuating his words with the proof that time was already running out. Dominic grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the basement door. "Move! Now!" They descended into darkness, Elena gripping Dominic's hand with the desperate strength of someone clinging to their only anchor in a storm. Behind them, she could hear the sounds of entry, doors being kicked in, heavy footsteps spreading through the upper floors, voices calling to each other in coded commands. The basement was exactly as she remembered it from childhood, low-ceilinged and musty, filled with Rosa's forgotten possessions. But where there had once been a blank wall, Eleanor now saw a heavy metal door that looked completely out of place among the antique furniture and cardboard boxes. Dominic pressed his palm against a panel beside the door, and it swung open to reveal a small room equipped with monitors, communications equipment, and enough supplies to survive for days, if necessary. He pushed Elena inside and sealed the door behind them, engaging locks that looked capable of withstanding significant force. Your grandmother didn't know about this, he said, answering a question Elena had not asked. I had it installed while she was in the hospital for her hip surgery 3 years ago. Told the contractor it was a wine cellar renovation. You've been watching over her all this time. Eleanor sank into one of the chairs, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Wait. Valentina told me, but I didn't really understand until now. Rosa was all I had left of you. Dominic's voice was matter of fact, as if he were discussing ordinary business rather than years of devoted protection. Keeping her safe was the only way I could still keep you safe, even if you were already gone. Above them, the sounds of searchers had reached the main floor. Elena could hear muffled thumps, the crash of furniture being overturned, voices raised in frustration. But down, here in Dominic's hidden fortress, those sounds seemed distant, belonging to another world entirely. What do the Rossettis want? Elena asked. After 5 years, why would they care if I'm alive or not? Dominic turned from the monitors he had been examining and sat in the chair across from her. In the dim light of the safe room, his face looked older, more worn, as though the adrenaline was the only thing holding exhaustion at bay. The situation has changed since you left. The old boss, Antonio Rossetti, died 2 years ago. His son Michael took over, and Michael is... Dominic paused, searching for the right words. Different, more ambitious, less patient. He's been consolidating power, eliminating anyone who might challenge his authority. And he's always been obsessed with what he considers unfinished business. Meaning me. Meaning the woman who humiliated his family by escaping their threat. As long as you were dead, you were a closed chapter. But alive? Dominic shook his head slowly. Alive? You're proof that someone escaped their reach. That's intolerable to a man like Michael Rossetti. Eleanor absorbed this information, fitting it into the puzzle she had been assembling for 5 years. And you? Where do you stand with them now? Where I've always stood. In opposition. A ghost of his old sardonic smile crossed Dominic's face. The Vittori family isn't what it was when we married, Elena. I've spent the past 5 years transforming our operations, moving away from the activities that put targets on our backs, establishing legitimate business ventures that don't require men with weapons to protect. But the Rossettis never accepted that evolution. They see it as weakness. Is it? Weakness? Perhaps. It's also the only way I could live with myself after you died. The smile faded. I used to tell myself that everything I did was for you, for us, for the family we would build together. And when you were gone, when I thought I had lost you forever, I couldn't stomach the justifications anymore. So I started changing things, slowly, carefully, but genuinely. I wanted to become the man you deserved, even if you weren't there to see it. The sincerity in his voice cut through Eleanor's defenses like nothing else could have. This was the Dominic she had fallen in love with. Not the powerful boss, not the calculating strategist, but the man who had looked at her on their wedding day and promised her a future built on love rather than fear. I didn't know, she whispered. I had no way of knowing you were changing. How could you? You were busy being dead. But there was no accusation in the words, only a weary acceptance of circumstances neither of them had chosen. Above them, the sounds of searching had intensified. Eleanor could hear footsteps directly overhead now, could imagine the Rossetti soldiers tearing through her grandmother's possessions, destroying the remnants of a life that had already ended. Her hands clenched, involuntarily at the thought. They'll find the basement eventually, she said. Yes, but they won't find this room. The door is designed to look like part of the foundation wall from the outside, and even if they suspect something, they don't have the tools or the time to breach it before my people arrive. As if in confirmation, Dominic's phone buzzed. He listened briefly, then ended the call with visible relief. 12 minutes. Our reinforcements are closer than expected. He paused, studying her face in the dim light. We're going to survive this, Elena, and then we're going to have to figure out what comes next. What do you want to come next? The question emerged before she could stop it. Dominic was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than before, stripped of its usual control. What I want is impossible. I want the past 5 years back. I want to return to that night before you ran and say different words, make different choices. I want the child we never got to have and the future we never got to build." He exhaled slowly. "But wanting those things won't make them real. So what I need to know is what you want. Do you want to disappear again? Go back to being Emma Collins in some other small town? I won't stop you if that's your choice. I'll even help you do it properly this time. Set you up somewhere they'll never find you. Ensure you have everything you need." "And if I don't want to disappear?" The question hung in the air, between them, charged with potential. "Then we'll figure out something else. Together." Dominic leaned forward, close enough that she could see the hope he was trying to hide behind his careful words. "I'm not the man I was 5 years ago, Elena. I've changed, rebuilt myself from the grief up. I'm not asking you to trust me based on who I used to be. I'm asking you to give me the chance to show you who I've become." Before Elena could respond, the monitors behind Dominic lit up with movement. On one screen, she could see dark figures retreating from the brownstone's rear entrance. On another, vehicles pulling away from the front. And on a third, the welcome sight of SUVs bearing familiar markings pulling into position. "Our people," Dominic confirmed, checking his phone. "The Rossettis are withdrawing. They don't have the numbers for a direct confrontation." Relief flooded through Eleanor, so powerful that it left her momentarily lightheaded. They had survived. Against all odds, against the collision of past and present, they had survived. Dominic rose and began the process of unlocking the safe room door, but he paused before opening it, turning back to face her. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said quietly. "You've had enough shock for one lifetime, let alone one evening. For now, let me get you somewhere safe, somewhere you can rest and think. The choices can wait until you're ready to make them." Elena stood, her legs steadier now than they had been. "Where would we go?" "I have a place outside the city. Remote, secure, unknown to anyone outside my immediate circle. You can stay there as long as you need. No pressure, no expectations. Just safety and time." Safety and time. Two things Elena had not truly had since the day she fled Chicago. Two things she had not realized she was desperate for until this moment. "All right," she said. "Take me there." Dominic opened the safe room door, revealing the damaged basement beyond. But as Elena stepped through, she did not look back at the destruction. She looked forward, toward whatever new chapter was waiting to be written. The safe house was not what Elena had expected. When Dominic had mentioned a remote location, her mind had conjured images of isolated cabins or anonymous highway motels. Instead, the SUV carried them through the darkness to a lakeside estate that looked like something from a magazine spread on contemporary architecture. Glass and stone rose from the landscape in clean lines, surrounded by acres of private woodland that ensured no neighbors could intrude. A long driveway wound through the trees before depositing them at an entrance flanked by subtle security measures that Elena's trained eye recognized as state-of-the-art. "This is yours?" she asked as they approached the front doors. "One of several properties I acquired after you left. I needed places to think, to rebuild. Places that didn't carry memories of us." Dominic punched a code into the panel beside the door. "This became my primary retreat. I've never brought anyone here before." The interior was as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings, warm woods, floor-to-ceiling windows that would offer stunning views of the lake in daylight. But the furnishings were comfortable rather than ostentatious, chosen for functionality as much as aesthetics. It was the home of a man who valued peace over display. Dominic led her through the main living area to a wing of guest rooms at the far end of the house. "You can have any of these. They're all equipped with private bathrooms and the kitchen is stocked. Tomorrow I'll have someone bring your things from the brownstone, whatever the Rossettis didn't destroy." "Where will you be?" "The master's suite is on the opposite wing, far enough to give you privacy, close enough to respond if anything happens." He paused in the hallway, suddenly awkward in a way that reminded Eleanor of their first dates, before power and danger had complicated everything. Get some rest, you're safe here, I promise you that. Eleanor chose a room overlooking the lake and closed the door behind her with a sigh that seemed to release years of tension. The space was beautiful. A queen-sized bed, dressed in neutral tones. A small sitting area with a fireplace, an ensuite bathroom that featured both a rain shower and a soaking tub. She should sleep. Every cell in her body was crying out for rest. But her mind refused to quiet, replaying the impossible. Events of the past 24 hours in an endless loop. She had returned to Chicago, expecting to handle her grandmother's estate and slip away again into anonymity. Instead, she had been discovered within hours, confronted by her husband's mother, reunited with the man she had fled, threatened by enemies she had hoped to escape, and now found herself in a lakeside mansion, wondering what the next chapter of her life could possibly look like. Elena ran a bath in the soaking tub, adding some of the fragrant oils she found arranged on a shelf nearby. The hot water welcomed her aching body, and she lay there until her skin pruned and her thoughts finally began to slow. She had a choice to make, perhaps the most important choice of her life. She could disappear again. Dominic had offered to help her do it right this time, to set her up in safety far from Chicago and the conflicts that had driven her away. It would mean more years of hiding, more assumed identities, more looking over her shoulder. But it would also mean freedom from the world that had terrified her into flight, or she could stay. Not as a prisoner, not as a protected treasure locked away from danger, but as a partner. Dominic had changed. She had seen the evidence of that in his eyes, heard it in his words, observed it in the choices he had made while believing her dead. The transformation she had not thought possible had somehow begun without her. But staying meant accepting risks. It meant building a life in the shadow of enemies who would never forgive her survival. It meant loving a man whose world, however reformed, would always carry traces of darkness. Eleanor dried off and dressed in pajamas she found in the room's dresser, clearly stocked for potential guests. Then she climbed into the bed and stared at the ceiling, watching the faint reflections of moonlight on lake water dance across the plaster. Somewhere in the house, Dominic was probably doing the same thing, lying awake, wrestling with questions that had no easy answers, wondering what the morning would bring. That thought, strangely, was what finally allowed Elena to close her eyes. She was not alone anymore in her uncertainty. Whatever came next, she would not be facing it in isolation. Sleep, when it finally came, was dreamless and deep. The next morning arrived gentle and golden, autumn sunlight streaming through the windows overlooking the lake. Eleanor woke slowly, disoriented for a moment before memory returned and oriented her in this new reality. She found clothes in the dresser, her size, tasteful and practical, clearly purchased in anticipation of exactly this situation. The thoughtfulness of the gesture made her pause. Dominic had been preparing for possibilities for years, maintaining hope that she might somehow return, even as he mourned her loss. She dressed and followed the scent of coffee to the kitchen, where she discovered Dominic at the stove, expertly flipping pancakes with a concentration. That suggested this was a familiar ritual. "You cook," she said, surprised. "I learned." He did not turn around. "After you left, I had a lot of empty hours to fill. Cooking helped. It's methodical, you know. Follow the recipe, execute the steps, produce something real at the end. Very satisfying when the rest of life feels chaotic." Elena slid onto a stool at the kitchen island, accepting the mug of coffee he placed before her. "You've changed more than I realized." "I had to. The alternative was becoming someone I couldn't live with." He plated 2 stacks of pancakes and brought them to the island, sitting across from her. "I hope you still like these. Blueberry, with a little lemon zest, the way you used to make them." She had forgotten that detail. The lemon zest that had been her grandmother's secret addition. But Dominic had remembered. After 5 years, after believing her dead, he had remembered. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that exists between two people who no longer need words to fill every space. Outside the window, the lake sparkled under the morning sun, and a pair of swans glided across the water with serene indifference to the complexities of human emotion. "I need to ask you something," Elena said finally, "and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Ask." if I stay, if I choose to try rebuilding something with you, what does that actually look like? Your life, your business, your world? How do I fit into it without becoming what I was before? Without being a target, a vulnerability, a weakness your enemies can exploit? Dominic set down his fork and met her eyes. I've thought about that question for 5 years. I've imagined every scenario, planned for contingencies I hoped I'd never need, designed a life that could accommodate a partner without endangering them. And the truth is that I can't guarantee your safety any more than I could 5 years ago. What I can guarantee is that the threats have diminished. The Rossettis are the last major adversary who still operates by the old rules. Everyone else has either been eliminated, reformed, or bought off. The empire I inherited has become something different. Legitimate businesses, real estate, investments. Legal enterprises that don't require armed protection. But the Rossettis remain. For now. But that problem has a finite timeline. Dominic's expression hardened. Michael Rossetti made a mistake coming after you last night. He exposed his hand, too early. Revealed his obsession to people who will help me exploit it. Within 6 months, maybe less, the Rossetti family will no longer be a factor in anyone's equation. Eleanor studied his face, searching for the ruthlessness she remembered, the cold calculations that had frightened her years ago. She found something different, a determination that was fierce but controlled, protective rather than predatory. And after the Rossettis, what then? Then we live. For the first time since her return, Dominic's smile reached his eyes. Normally, boringly, beautifully. Travel if you want. Stay here if you prefer. Start over completely somewhere new. I don't care where we are or what we do, Elena. I only care that we're together. The simplicity of the statement cut through her carefully maintained defenses. This was not the power-hungry boss who had terrified her with revelations of threats and enemies. This was the man she had married, stripped of everything except his love for her, and his willingness to change for that love. I spent 5 years being afraid, Elena said slowly. 5 years hiding, running, pretending to be someone I wasn't. I thought that was what survival required. Becoming invisible, becoming nobody. She paused, gathering courage for the words that would change everything. But I don't want to be invisible anymore, Dominic. I don't want to be Emma Collins living a half-life in some forgotten town. I want to be Elena Vittori. I want to come home. The effect of her words on Dominic was visible. A release of tension, a softening of features, a brightness in his eyes that she had not seen in years. But he did not move to embrace her, did not rush the moment. Instead, he reached across the island and took her hand, holding it gently as though she were something precious that might shatter. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "Because once this begins, once we announce that you're alive and you're with me, there's no going back. The world will know. The enemies will know. Everything becomes real and permanent." "I'm sure." And she was. For the first time since she fled Chicago 5 years ago, Elena Marchetti was absolutely certain of what she wanted. "I'm tired of being a ghost, Dominic. I want to be alive again. I want to be your wife again. I want to build the life we should have had before fear drove me away." Dominic rose from his stool and came around the island to stand before her. He cupped her face in his hands, the way he had done on their wedding day, and looked into her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Then we start today, right now. We begin rebuilding everything we lost, and we don't stop until we've created something stronger than what we had before." He pressed his forehead against hers. "Welcome home, Elena. Welcome back to the living." And for the first time in 5 years, Elena Marchetti felt truly, completely alive. 6 months later, Elena stood at the window of the lakeside house that had become their home, watching snow fall on the frozen expanse of water beyond. The world was quiet, muffled by winter's white blanket, and she felt a peace she had not believed possible during her years of exile. So much had changed since that rain-soaked night in her grandmother's brownstone. True to his word, Dominic had systematically dismantled the Rossetti threat, not through violence, but through strategic exposure of their operations to authorities who were happy to receive such detailed evidence. Michael Rossetti and his top lieutenants were now facing decades of prosecution, their empire crumbling around them as former allies rushed to distance themselves from the wreckage. Eleanor herself had emerged from hiding carefully, gradually, like a flower unfurling after a long winter. The story they told was close enough to the truth. A young wife who had entered witness protection after threats against her life, who had spent years in hiding until conditions changed enough to allow her return. It was a narrative that earned sympathy rather than scandal, and the media attention had been intense but manageable. She had reconnected with old friends who had mourned her, accepting their tears and their joy with equal grace. She had visited her grandmother's grave and wept for the years they had lost, for the apologies she could never make, for the love that had survived even her worst choices. And she had begun, slowly but surely, to rebuild her own identity as Eleanor Vittori, a woman of strength and resilience who had survived her fears and emerged transformed. Footsteps behind her announced Dominic's arrival. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as they watched the snow fall together. "The construction crew called," he said. "The renovations on your grandmother's brownstone are almost complete. Another month and it'll be ready." Eleanor smiled. Restoring Rosa's house had been her project, her way of honoring the woman who had raised her while creating something new from the ruins of the past. The brownstone would become a community center, offering resources and support to women fleeing dangerous situations, a living memorial to both the grandmother she had lost and the fear that had once controlled her own life. "I was thinking about the opening ceremony," she said. "I'd like to keep it small, just family and close friends. Maybe some of the women who'll be using the center. Whatever you want. It's your project, your vision." Dominic pressed a kiss to her temple. "Have I told you lately how proud I am of you?" "Only about 12 times today." She turned in his arms to face him, her hands resting on his chest. "But I don't mind hearing it again." The past 6 months had not been without challenges. Rebuilding trust took time, and they had both carried wounds that did not heal overnight. There had been arguments, moments of doubt, days when the weight of the past threatened to collapse all the progress they had made. But there had also been joy, laughter over burnt dinners and successful ones, long conversations that stretched into the night, revealing parts of themselves they had kept hidden even during their first marriage. Quiet moments like this one, standing together in the warmth of their home while winter tried to reach them from outside. "I need to tell you something," Elena said, her heart accelerating. Concern flashed across Dominic's face. "What is it?" She took his hand and placed it low on her stomach, where a new life was just beginning to make its presence known. "We're going to need a bigger house eventually. This one only has 5 bedrooms. The realization hit him slowly, and then all at once. His eyes widened, his breath caught, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. When he finally found his voice, it emerged rough with emotion. We're about 12 weeks along. I wanted to be sure before I told you. Wanted to wait until we were past the danger." "Zone?" Elena's own eyes were filling with tears. "I know we never talked about trying again. Never discussed whether—" He silenced her with a kiss that conveyed everything words could not. When he finally pulled back, his face was wet with tears he did not bother to hide. "I never stopped hoping," he whispered. "Even when I thought you were gone, even when I believed I would never hold our child in my arms, I never stopped hoping for this." He dropped to his knees before her, pressing his forehead to her stomach with a reverence that made Elena's heart ache. "Thank you. Thank you for coming back, for giving us another chance, for this miracle I don't deserve, but will spend my life earning." Elena ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed by the tenderness of the moment. "You already have earned it, Dominic. Every day, in every choice you make, you prove that the man I loved is still here, stronger than ever." He looked up at her with eyes that held no shadows, no walls, no secrets. "I love you, Elena Vittori. I have loved you since the day we met, and I will love you until the last breath leaves my body. and I will love this child with everything I am, protect them with everything I have, and give them the life we should have had all along. I know, she said simply. I've always known. I just needed to stop being afraid long enough to believe it. Later that evening, they sat together by the fireplace, making plans for a future that finally felt possible. Names for the baby, changes to the house, announcements to family and friends. The snow continued to fall outside, but inside was warmth and love and the quiet certainty that all the pain of the past had been leading to this moment. Elena thought about the woman she had been 5 years ago, terrified, pregnant, alone, making the impossible choice to die so that she might survive. That woman had not believed in happy endings, had not trusted that love could conquer fear, had not imagined that the very man she fled could become her greatest source of safety. But that woman had also been brave enough to run, strong enough to survive, and ultimately courageous enough to come home when the time was right. The journey from there to here had been longer and harder than any fairy tale, filled with real obstacles and genuine fears rather than magical solutions. But perhaps that was what made this ending so precious. It had been earned through suffering, through growth, through the willingness to change and be changed. Dominic reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers with the easy intimacy of two people who had weathered storms together and emerged on the other side. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About storms," Eleanor replied, "and how sometimes you have to go through them to find out what you're really made of, and how the best shelter isn't a place, it's a person who chooses to weather the storm beside you." He squeezed her hand, understanding, without needing explanation. "I'll always be that person for you, Elena, no matter what storms come." "I know." She leaned her head against his shoulder and watched the fire dance. "That's why I finally stopped running." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. Inside, two people who had been broken by fear and healed by love held each other close and waited for the morning. And in the quiet of that winter night, with their child growing safe beneath her heart and her husband's arms wrapped around her, Eleanor Marchetti finally understood what she had been searching for all along. Not escape, not safety, not the absence of danger. Just this. Just love. Just home. If you have watched this far, it is because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying, "I have watched this far so I can get to know you," and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel. And if this story made you feel something, if it touched your heart or brought tears to your eyes, then please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to come home, that love can survive even our worst mistakes, and that the people we run from might be the ones waiting to heal us. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already, because every week we bring you stories like this one. Stories of love surviving against all odds, of broken people finding their way back to each other, of happy endings that are earned through courage and faith. You are part of this family now, and we are so grateful to have you here. Until next time, remember that no matter how far you have run or how long you have been hiding, home is still waiting for you. All you have to do is be brave enough to return.